Okay, hi guys. Welcome to another Travel Writing School podcast. Really interesting one this time. Georgie Darling. I've got to say, Georgie, I haven't been following you as closely as I could have, but a few days ago, you popped into my LinkedIn feed with, I guess, what we could describe as a semi-viral post that you sent out about your income as a travel writer, as a travel copywriter, and you hadn't asked me anything kind of going on there. I will put the link to that in the description for this video, because I think there's some really interesting stuff there. But really wanted to jump in on a call with you because you're earning, and Georgie did share with me her actual earnings spreadsheet, so I know this is all legit. Earnings of up to $17,000 in a month. I mean, it swings around a little bit, but a pretty good solid income that's probably on track for about 120K this year, maybe. This is US dollars. And doing it through travel copywriting, which is really interesting, I thought. So, and as well, doing this from what I read, I think you said somewhere else, you're doing it working about 3 days a week or something. So, and it's worth mentioning at this point as well that if anybody's really interested in really picking Georgie's brains about this, she does run a business coaching people, women especially, to do this. Thefreedomroute.com, I think, isn't it, Georgie? So you can go onto that and find out even more details. But I really want to get some of the nitty gritty on this call as well. But Georgie, tell us, what is travel copywriting? You corrected me when I reached out to you because I called it kind of branded work, and it's kind of all in my head. There's journalism and then the other stuff. But I suppose it's worth distinguishing between travel copywriting, travel journalism, and branded travel writing. So the bulk of your stuff comes through copywriting, the bulk of that also through retainers, which we'll get onto in a second. But how do you define copywriting? What is it that you do basically, and how does it differ to the other niches?
So first of all, thank you for such a lovely introduction. I think you summed it up perfectly when you just said the other stuff, because I call it copywriting. I mean, I'm from the UK, for anyone listening to this who can't tell from the accent, and I find in the UK and the US there is more of a distinction between copywriting and content writing. And I find in the UK, often a lot of brands will use those terms interchangeably. And then there's things like branded content as well, which I kind of tuck into that same pocket of the other stuff. But I guess when you break down what the actual content is more like content writing, or maybe even something separate to that. But I would say, as much as I refer to it as copywriting, the bulk of what I do is like brand content of some sort. So that's usually a mixture of copywriting and content writing. So for me, content writing is more of the long form stuff, like blog posts. I would maybe fit newsletters under that category as well. And then copywriting for me is more of the conversion focused stuff. So that could be landing pages, that could be email funnels, that could be more of the strategic stuff going on behind the scenes, more of the stuff that is written with a purpose to get people buying something, or at least entering the marketing funnel where eventually they may write something. Whereas content writing for me is more of the behind the scenes stuff that's going to, I guess, warm people up, but very much top of funnel, very much like the stuff that people will read out of interest, but isn't necessarily being published with the intention of someone buying immediately afterwards.
Okay, so that does sound quite different to kind of travel journalism, where you're traveling to a place or having an experience and then writing about it, with the only agenda really being to tell the story as well as you can tell it. Do you have a marketing background? Does that filter into this in a much bigger way than it would in travel journalism? Is this still travel writing? Do you still consider it travel writing?
I actually have a journalism background.
Okay.
Yeah, I have a journalism degree from the University of Sheffield, and I did my NCTJs and BJTC and PPA accreditations at the same time. And then I actually worked as a news journalist in London for a couple of years and enjoyed it, but news journalism was very depressing, and I tried to squeeze as much travel content out of that as possible. The travel department, I was working at Yahoo News and HuffPost, and the travel team there were really lovely and tried to find me as many travel opportunities as I could possibly squeeze out. So that's kind of my background. Yeah, I would say I would still count it as travel writing, the stuff that I do now, but to be honest, it's not as fun, if we're being completely transparent here, because you have less creative control. I do still do a bit of travel journalism. Occasionally I still go on press trips and write editorial things and stuff like that, but I don't do it as the main bulk of my work as much as it is more interesting, because I'm sure as you and everyone else knows, it doesn't usually pay half as well as copywriting and things like that. So there's definitely pros and cons to both.
I mean, there's also definitely, I mean, everyone I speak to who is a freelancer, you just can't afford to do the cold pitching for free journalism articles because it just doesn't pay enough. It's such a drain, the pitching side of things, and you're only going to win, 20% if you're lucky, kind of thing, of your pitches. So the copywriting and the working for brands. I mean, I know a travel writer who doesn't even, his branded work is for banks and law firms and stuff. So that pays really well, which affords him the luxury of then doing the little travel press trips and going off on his travel things as he needs to on the side. Is that kind of how it's working with you as well?
Yeah, I used to say to people that 80% of my work was copywriting and 20% was journalism. And I would say that has shifted to maybe 95%, if not more. Like I do really love travel writing, but for me, it takes a lot more time, and I feel like as much as it is really exciting and you do get these incredible opportunities, I think it just takes so much more time and creative energy than copywriting and stuff. So I will do it. Like, for example, if I get invited on a press trip and it's one that I really want to go on, I will dedicate some time to pitching that story around. Obviously, nowadays, most press trips do want confirmed coverage before they'll even offer you an official place on the trip. So I will spend some time doing it. And I will spend more time if it's a trip that I do really want to go on. But it's not anywhere near the main scope of my workload, just because it's not financially viable, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's get into kind of the nitty-gritty then of what you're doing now. So this copywriting, like I said, you've had a high this year of $17,000 in a month, a low of 8,000, which is still very good. So what kind of gigs are these? Like, break down a month, a typical month. How much writing are you actually doing? How much are you pitching? I know that retainers, it makes up a large chunk of what you do. How much of that is retainer work? Why did you suddenly jump to 17,000 one month, for example, and then drop down the next month? Give us the picture there.
So I have 5 clients on retainer at the moment, and in total, those pay me, I think it's around about $8,000 a month for my retainers. So that's why my base is usually 8K. Then the months that spike after that are when I take on sporadic, like short-term projects and things like that. So the month with 17K, that was most definitely not a 3-day working week. I would say that was a month where I was very, very close to burnout. So incredible from a financial perspective, but definitely not sustainable from like a long-term workload perspective. That was mostly my own fault, to be fair. So yeah, the clients that I work with now are mostly retainers. Those are ones that I have cold pitched over the last few years. 2 of those are ones that I took on earlier this year to replace a retainer of a client that was getting quite irritating for reasons that I won't get into. And then another one of those is someone that was a referral from someone that I cold pitched either November 2022 or November 2023, I can't remember. That 17K month was because I had a referral from the web developer of a retainer that I pitched, or like a retainer that I have from a client that I cold pitched. And they wanted this huge like website rewrite. Basically, they had a website that hadn't been updated in a very long time, and they essentially wanted to scrap it. So they paid the web developer to just redo it from scratch, and then they paid me to do all of the strategy and every single word that was written on this new website. The reason why it was such a crazily high month is because I was working off of this big spreadsheet, and this big spreadsheet had multiple tabs. So I thought I'd completed the work. It was ongoing for, I think it was about a three or 4 month project in the end, and thought I'd sent off all of this work and realized I'd missed an entire page on this spreadsheet. So luckily they were really lovely, and that was meant to be finished, I think, at the end of June. And from memory, I can't remember on the spreadsheet if that was the crazy high month or not, but we'll assume it was June for now. So it gets to maybe a week before the end of June, and I send them off this lovely message that says, I think I've completed everything. And then they got back to me and were like, oh, okay, but did you see this page? And I was like, oh my God, I did not see that page. So they were really nice. They were like, okay, we can give you a bit of time into July if need be. And I just had to put my head down and got through everything. That was mostly like a couple of extra website pages and some blog posts, some like thought leadership style interviews with them to add to the editorial section of their website. So yeah, good financial month, but terrible
head strain.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, right. But you said there you won these retainers off of stuff that you had pitched like a year or more ago. How does that work? So you pitched ages ago, and they just remembered you when they needed something, and they remembered that pitch?
So when I pitch people, I pitch them offering them, I don't go in to say long-term support, but that's always my intention. So I pitch people copywriting support. So this client, for example, if I work backwards, there was a wine tourism, no, it wasn't. It was a Latin America tour company that I pitched either November 22 or 23, I can't remember. And I worked with them. I reached out to them. It took them a month to get back to me. And then they had a couple of copywriters in-house, but they were launching their second website from memory. And they took me on for what ended up being about 4 months, I think, of just doing loads of different copywriting, like hotel descriptions and stuff for them. That work came to an end when that project finished. When it happened, like when I get to the end of a project, I always say to people, still have capacity next month, like when I do have capacity. And I say to them, these are the other things I offer. Do you need any of these things, etc., etc. At the time, they were like, thanks, we'll get back in touch, as and when we do. They did actually get back in touch with me maybe 3 or 4 months ago now. And now I have them on an unofficial retainer, let's say, where I do have consistent work for them, but it's not an official agreement as such. Anyway, their web developer remembered me and put me in touch with someone else that I have on retainer now. And it was funny because when they did it, I didn't know anything about this web developer. So I get this message from this different wine tourism company, and they said, I'll use a different name for the sake of anonymity, but they were like, oh, Brad reached out and told us to speak to you about copywriting. And I was like, I don't know who Brad is. And I didn't admit this to them at the time. I was just like, oh, that's really lovely. And they told me the name of the company. It was their web developer as well. And I ended up falling down this huge Google hole, just trying to figure out who this Brad person was. And then eventually realized it was this web developer. And then fast forward a couple of years, that very same web developer then put me in touch with the luxury tour agency that I did this huge website project for and referred me again.
So this is a single pitch that you made coming back to reward you months, maybe years later, basically. Yes. Wow, yeah. That's amazing. Okay, so let's go into so how much writing you're actually doing per month then? Your 17,000 month is a bit of an outlier. Yeah. So let's take a regular month. You're saying you're doing about 3 days a week. Are you pumping out blog posts in each of those days, or what is it that you're doing? I know that kind of blog posts is your main, the main stuff you do. Then there's also kind of newsletters and other stuff as well. What's a typical day on a typical month? Like, how much writing are you doing, and are you still pitching in these weeks, or is it all just working on these retainer projects?
Mostly it's the retainer projects. This month has been the first month of the year where I've put myself on a firm ban of not taking on any short-term projects, because every single month this year has been very busy, and I've kept saying next month will be easier, and next month was not easier. So this month I'm saying no to anything else that comes my way, or referring it to other writers or things like that. But for me, a typical week, so Monday and Tuesday are my busiest writing days. And then inevitably there's another day further on in the week. So this week, for example, it's Thursday. The third one I keep quite flexible depending on client amends or, any admin bits that come along, etc., etc. Usually on blog writing days or general writing days, I will try and do 3 blog posts. And if I have newsletters, then I usually try and do 1 newsletter as well. But I will add a caveat here that I know these brands very well. I know their target clients, I know their tone of voice inside out, because I always send quite extensive forms to people when I first take them on as a client, just so that I can really get to know exactly how I should be writing. And I also do write very quickly. I know that what I can output in 1 day is, without boasting, I guess, higher than I would say the average person can. So I always say this because I don't want people to listen to this and be like, oh my God, I should be writing faster. I do write quickly.
And so who are these clients then? You've mentioned kind of a wine tourism agency and somebody else. Is it just the whole smattering of travel industry stakeholders, from hotels or airlines? Who do you pitch, and who are you getting work from in most cases?
Mostly tour companies.
Okay.
So most luxury tour companies, I would say. There's one that I work with who isn't luxury, but maybe a bit more mid-range, and then wine tourism companies. So I found that my income really scaled when I really started to focus on a particular niche. I think a problem that I found with travel writing is that because it's such a fun niche to work in and everyone wants to do it, I think if you do position yourself as a generalist, it's much harder to get brands to take you on. Whereas I think if you can position yourself as a specialist, then brands are going to see that authority in you and they're going to be far more likely to invest in you and trust you. So when I was pitching this Latin America tour company a few years back, I was traveling around Latin America at the time. So I said to them, like, I'm based here. These are the places I'm going. These are the places I've been. I've had a look through your website. I really love, I don't know, the tour that you did around Peru recently, et cetera, et cetera. So whenever I reach out to them, I do try and go a bit of the extra effort to show that I understand them, I understand their brand, I'm familiar with what they do. And I think that's really helped to get people to take me on and to see me as like long-term support rather than just a quick fix for something that needs editing.
And do you have like a background in wine or anything, or a particular passion for wine? How did you start winning those projects?
That one was quite funny, to be fair. I don't have any kind of official background in wine. I do want to do my WSEP qualifications for it. That one, so when I finished working as a journalist in London, I worked at a travel startup called Secret London, and I worked there as a copywriter and then was promoted to their branded content editor. And Secret London, their sales team were incredible at taking on alcohol brands. So I think I worked with probably about 50 different alcohol brands, and like some of the biggest brands in the world, like loads of Diageo ones, loads of Campari brands, stuff like that. And it just gave me a really good understanding of different alcohol brands. And then when I moved to Indonesia, I got, I don't know if the word would be scouted, but discovered, let's say, by a creative director there who also worked with a lot of alcohol brands in Indonesia. And because I was living there for 3.5 years, I ended up working on quite a few different alcohol brands amongst Indonesia as well, which meant that I had a good portfolio despite not having any big personal interest in it myself.
So you kind of fell into a niche and then just took advantage of it when the opportunity arose, kind of thing.
Yeah, very much so. And I think whenever I've tried to go through a new round of pitching, whenever I've been looking for new clients, I always try and think about who's going to have budget. And I think especially what with, I don't know, everything that's happened over the last few years in the world, I think it is harder for brands to spend their budget and have that budget and be getting that money from their clients. So for me, positioning myself so I work with luxury brands or brands that are taking in a lot of money is a much easier way to get them to spend that money. And I think as well, they are often a lot more familiar with spending big sums of money. So that the crazy income month earlier this year, I sent off the biggest invoice I had ever sent. Like, I don't know how much it works out to be in dollars, but it was like £9,600 or something. And I sent that off and I was terrified. I was like, I put this huge breakdown on the invoice of like, I don't know, bit by bit exactly what it was. And I was like, if you want more information, I can give it to you. And they were so lovely. They just replied and they were like, money very well spent. Like, thanks for all of your help. And it was crazy. But these people are used to spending money. So it's not a shock to them.
Exactly. And I mean, I think it goes to show as well that working in the copywriting, you're working with the marketing departments rather than the editorial departments, whose budgets are way bigger than editorial budgets. So they're very used. I'm sure that was probably the smallest invoice they paid that month in many ways, probably.
Yeah.
So let's talk about these retainers, because this is obviously, if you're travel writing on the journalism side, retainers are just like this golden goose thing that you're aiming for all the time. But obviously super handy because it takes you out of that horrible treadmill of pitching for every single little paycheck you want to win. So you've described a little bit there about how you've got these retainers. What other kind of little tips do you have there? I mean, do you only pitch for kind of long-term retainer projects, or do you try and establish a relationship first before you go for the bigger, long-winded stuff there? I mean, how do you actually approach, attacking the retainer thing?
It's very rare that I will talk about retainers initially in terms of proposing them a retainer. A business coach once said to me, like, you wouldn't propose on the first date, so you don't want to offer a retainer initially, because people get scared into a corner, don't they? Like, I think if someone's never worked with you before, they don't have that trust. They don't know that you can deliver the things that you're promising. And I think if you say to someone, I only work with people on a long-term basis, they're either going to run away or they're going to take a huge leap of faith, and it's unlikely to be the latter. So how I usually do it is when I am pitching people and when I'm having a discovery call with them, or when we're in the early stages of working together, I will say to them that typically I do work with people on a long-term basis. So I won't actually pitch myself as a long-term support, but I will say to them, this is usually how I work with people. And I find that that maybe psychologically gives them a boost because it shows them that other people do trust me to do this. And therefore, perhaps I am good at what I say that I can do. So usually when I work with people, we'll work together for a month, maybe 2 or 3 months. And then whatever that initial first project is, when we're about sometimes halfway, sometimes 2/3 of the way through, definitely before it's actually come to an end, I will say to them, like, what are your marketing goals next? Like, what is it that you'll be working on in the next quarter? Sometimes, depending on the size of the brand, especially if it's a smaller company, then I'll have a look around like their website or what else I know about their marketing, and I'll suggest things to them as well. So like one client that I was working with recently that I have on a retainer, they did have a newsletter, but a very, very sporadic one. I don't think there was anyone officially in charge of it. I think it was just, oh God, we haven't sent a newsletter in 3 months. Let's put something out there. And I said to them, like, I do this for my clients. I also run a newsletter of my own, which is somewhat successful. So I was like, I have a background of doing this. I think it would be very beneficial. Like, your email list is really beneficial for blah, 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 all of these reasons. Is that something you'd be interested in? And they were like, yes, please take it off our hands. So I never initially say to people, like, I work on a retainer basis, but I will offer it to them as more of a concept than an official request. And yeah, in terms of what those entail, the big bulk of it usually is like blog posts and long form content. Newsletters I do always try to offer people because for me, I can write them very quickly. I'm very used to writing email copy, and it's a nice thing that they can tack on that doesn't take much time essentially, and strategy as well. So if I'm working with smaller companies who don't necessarily have a big marketing department, then they realize that because I am quite involved in this niche now, and because I've been doing this for over a decade now and things, I can usually give some quite good insights there as well. So that usually comes into it too.
Yeah, strategies are really, I was going to ask you this later, but let's tackle it now, because strategy is an interesting one. It's like one of those things, you hear strategy and like, well, what exactly is strategy? What does it mean? So when you're offering that to a client, break that down for us. What are you actually offering? Like with blog posts and newsletters, it's very easy. It's a very kind of one by one thing. You can visualize it, but strategy is kind of a bit more vague, isn't it?
I think a lot of people think it is. And it's funny because I think a lot of freelancers, regardless of niche, are offering strategy without actually knowing that they're offering strategy, or without charging for the fact that they're offering strategy. So strategy is essentially saying to the client, what is it that you're working on? What is it that you're working towards? Let me build that into something that's a bit more formalized. So, for example, one of the wine tourism brands that I work with, they wanted to boost their sales to France, let's say. And they said, currently we are doing this amount of tours to France. We would like to increase it by this percentage. And then we look at that and we say, okay, so how are we going to achieve that? We're going to achieve that through SEO blog content. We're going to achieve that through consistent newsletters. We're going to achieve that maybe through like running ads, which I don't do, but when people want ads, I refer to them to someone that I know who does do ads. And then you just look at what that actually includes and you say, okay, so we want blog posts. How much budget do we have for these blog posts, which will tell us how many we're going to publish per month and things like that. So I think a lot of freelancers who work with smaller brands, they often end up doing all of this stuff, but they don't have the confidence to charge for it separately as strategic work. And there can be so much money in strategic work.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you're actually doing the job of a staffer, as it were, but for them, you're taking a big mission statement and then just breaking it down into the actionable steps that they need to take on.
Yeah, so it's partially just organization as well, I think, which I do love.
Okay, so this brings us on to as well, like, so copywriting. I mean, I think for those involved in travel journalism, it's quite easy because you just write about your feelings, your experience, people you met, a few quotes here and there, and there's not too much extracurricular stuff you need to consider. Copywriting, I imagine, is a little bit different. You mentioned kind of SEO there and other things like that. When you're doing these blog posts or newsletters, how much of these other skills or these other bits of knowledge do you need to bring into your work, such as SEO? And are you is that kind of a big part of it, or are you just kind of scribbling out some thoughts?
It's becoming a bigger part. I think as I've been charging more, there's been more of an expectation, understandably, that I would do that side of things. But it varies again on the client. So I have a couple of clients who every month they will just say, these are the blog posts that we want you to write. They will do all of the SEO stuff and even just the strategic stuff themselves. Then there are others that are like, okay, so if we want to increase wine tours to France, then what keywords do we need to be hitting? And that's when I'll do the research and stuff like that. So I use a tool called Surfer SEO. That one's quite good. There's also loads of different ones out there at like a range of price points and things. But I wouldn't say there's like one set way that clients expect me to do this work. I think it's just some of them have more of an expectation of it than others. But I think SEO is a very good skill to have nowadays. I think there can be a lot of money in it. And I think as much as Google's algorithm is ever changing, I think if you have some top line SEO knowledge, and there are so many tools out there where you can learn this stuff for free, then I think it's a very good, what's the phrase I'm looking for? String to add to your bow, or whatever the phrase is.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, and I guess these days it's not, we kind of moved on from SEO, and it's I don't know what the phrase is, but it's like AI optimization, isn't it? So that you appear in ChatGPT's results and that sort of thing, which I think probably would be a smart thing to get into if you've got the time.
Yeah, that's not something I know or really anything about, to be fair. I am seeing more people talking about it nowadays. I don't know, maybe if it's that my clients also are not up to date with that or whatever, but they do still see a lot of traffic from SEO. Like I was working on a big content project for like wine tours in Champagne recently, and it took maybe four to 6 weeks, and they started seeing a good increase in traffic and inquiries already. So there's definitely still money to be made there.
Brilliant. Okay, so let's go back to these kind of retainer and particularly the pitch. Now, I'm very big on the pitch in analyzing the pitch for travel journalism pieces, and it's not that complicated when you break it down. It sounds like I know you don't pitch retainers kind of off the bat straight away, but when you're reaching out to clients, let's say, and I know that when you do this, you're quite strategic about this as well. You'll like pitch 100 people in 1 month or 1 week. Maybe you can describe a bit of that as well, like how you go about the pitching. But what is in your pitch? What are you selling? What are you offering? And how do you kind of position yourself and your services?
So maybe if I talk you through my process of pitching, that will lend itself quite nicely, because otherwise it's a bit of backwards explaining. So another reason why I think it's really useful to niche down and even to hyper niche into Latin America tour companies rather than just tour companies, let's say, is because it makes the pitching process a lot faster. Because if I say to people that when I'm pitching, I'll send 100 pitches in one go, a lot of people are going to listen to that and be like, oh my God, how is that even possible? Like, how many hours in the day are you spending on this? And in reality, it doesn't actually take that long. So when I'm pitching, for example, back in 2022, let's say, when I was pitching this Latin America tour company, I opened a new spreadsheet. I went onto Google, I typed in Latin America tour companies, and then I just went through and copied and pasted the first, I think it was slightly less than 100, maybe it was about 75, but the first 75 tour companies that popped up on the first maybe 3 pages of Google or thereabouts. I think the second page of Google is the sweet spot in terms of people who are more likely to get back to you. But I think the first 3 are good, because if you are a Latin America tour company and you're sat on one of the first few pages of Google, then presumably you're already investing in your marketing, whether that's organic, whether that's paid. It shows that if you are there, you understand that marketing is a good thing to have. Therefore, immediately you're going to be a lot more receptive if someone reaches out to you out of the blue and says, like, pay me to help you with this stuff. I did, before I started doing all this, I used to try and pitch like hyper local independent brands, and that I never had much success with, because those, as much as arguably they were the ones in the most need of like freelance support, they didn't have the budget for it, and they couldn't, I guess, see the benefits of it because they hadn't invested in it yet. So that to me never worked as a strategy. But just going for the ones on the first 3 pages of Google, I found was the most effective. So I would put all of those onto a spreadsheet. And then one thing I did that was very useful is I hired a virtual assistant on Upwork who specialized in lead generation. And that person went through and found the email address and ideally the LinkedIn contact of someone in the marketing team at each of these brands. And that to me is the part that if you do it yourself, that is the part that's going to take hours and hours and hours. And a lot of people, when I tell them this, they kind of come to a halt, because they think that if you hire someone, you need to hire someone and get like a employee contract and, you know, drop hundreds and hundreds of pounds per month and stuff like that. But it did take me maybe 4 or 5 different virtual assistants before I found one who was efficient and actually found decent people and stuff like that. But then when I found someone, I think I maybe invested maybe like 80 to 100 US dollars. So I guess around about 70 to 80 pounds. And that was for someone who was a lead generation specialist. So they have all of this amazing software that allows them to find people really quickly. That software, in my opinion, is quite expensive, is not worth investing in unless you actually do lead generation as your entire business. But when you hire someone, it probably took that person 2 or 3 hours, I would say, to then find these 75 contacts. So I invested, let's say, 80 quid into it. But then I ended up getting this Latin America tour company, and obviously everything spiraled from there in terms of the bounce backs that I got from that. So then when you've got these contact lists, you've got the email, you've got the LinkedIn, that's when I would put together a pitch template. And the pitch template for me is the really important part, because if you're spending time personalizing every single pitch, again, it's going to take you hours and hours and hours. Whereas I think when you're pitching a very specific niche, you can put together a template that talks to that niche. So I would put together a template that included a few lines about my expertise and my background. I would include some portfolio samples that were specific to that niche, and I would include a link to my website. And then when I actually reach out to people, I took the template from, there's a writer called Jennifer Goforth Gregory, and she has a brilliant blog where she shares loads of content marketing tips and things. And she published a blog post and a book ages ago, and she has something called the 5-sentence letter of introduction. And I basically use that format. So I say along the lines of, "Hi, Sarah. Hope you're having a good day. My name is Georgie. I'm a freelance content marketing writer specializing in wine tourism brands. I work with brands like X, Y, and Z. And usually most of my work consists of SEO blog posts, newsletters, and strategic work. Here's a link to my website. I've included a few portfolio samples below. Would love to chat if you need any freelance support over the next few months. Have a good day. Hope to hear from you soon." So it's nothing that's particularly groundbreaking, and one thing I have done, and I have encouraged my coaching clients to do in more recent times, is to add one sentence at the top that is specific to that brand, which you should be able to find by having a quick flick through their website or through their Instagram, just to call out something interesting that they've done recently, because I think nowadays more than ever, it's important to be a human when you're reaching out to people and to prove that you're a human. And yeah, that has been my go-to template for the last however many years.
And I think the interesting point for me as well is that you do treat it very much like as a numbers game.
Yes.
That's 75 pitches, and you might win one, you know, but it pays for everything. And if you get that as a long-term client, it's going to keep paying as well, month after month, year after year, hopefully. I think one of the fears that I find a lot of people have is that they send out one pitch, and then they're waiting on tenterhooks, you know, for some magical thing to happen. And 100 pitches does sound scary, but I used to run a thing called the 100 pitch challenge.
Yes.
It's for travel journalists, trying to pitch out 100 times in a month, just to try and get people out of that fear of pitching, treat it as a numbers game and a volume game as much as a quality game as well, of course.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And I think especially when you're in the early stages of pitching, there is so much fear attached. Like when you're looking at an editor's profile and you can see their face and then you think, oh, I've just emailed them. It feels quite personal if they reject you or if they just don't get back to you. And I think just like you do with the 100 pitching challenge, I think if you can desensitize the process of sending these pitches, it helps to turn it into so much more of like a business habit than something that can be quite personal and intimidating.
Okay, so let's get on to some of the stuff that you actually write then. I know we've gone into it in a little bit, but you write quite quickly, you say. So is that you can write several blog posts in a day? Is that
yeah?
Yeah.
I would say usually I do 3 a day, but again, I would say what's beneficial about working 3 days a week is I give my brain the chance to like re-energize itself or whatever. Like I definitely couldn't do 3 blog posts plus whatever else a day for 5 days a week, but I know that I can put my head down and do it in 2.5, 3 days a week, and then give myself the other 2 days to not do anything that requires that part of my brain.
And you said as well that you're able to write quickly because you have a lot of this knowledge in your head already. But how much extra research are you doing? Are you sitting down and literally just writing stuff out of your head, or are you having to do research each time? Like what's the kind of the trade-off there?
It kind of depends. Like a lot of the stuff that I write, I do write about places that I've been or things I've experienced. And what I usually do for those ones is I will put together an outline of what I'm going to write. And then if there's areas that I know that I need to research or things that I need to check if they've updated over the years or whatever, then I will kind of mark that on my outline. Then I will go through and I will write as much as I can just in one go. And then I will put it away and not look at it again until the next day. And then I will come back to it on, sometimes it's not necessarily the second day, sometimes it's like 6 hours later, but I kind of come back to it with fresh eyes, basically. And then when I come back to it with fresh eyes, I will do the researching, I will double check any facts, anything that needs updating, and then I will usually put it away again and then come back and edit it on another occasion. And for me, I do find that that's the best way of like getting everything out onto the page, not second guessing myself too much, but also realizing and kind of telling myself you will be coming back to this. So if there are things that are, I don't know, incorrect, whatever, then there will be a time and a space where I can go back and look through those properly.
And do you use AI, any kind of AI in your work?
I have tried to in the past, but it's just like when it first came out and every so often when it's been updated, I've given it a go. But it's like, it frustrates me because especially for travel writing, it's so inaccurate. I find that it just hallucinates so much stuff. And sometimes I've tried to use it for a bit of research. So like if I'm writing an article and it requires me to list, I don't know, restaurant recommendations in one part of France, then I will use it and say to it, like, I'm looking for 5 Michelin starred restaurants in Burgundy. Can you give me a list? Sometimes it gives me great ones. And then what I'll do is research them properly, go onto the websites, go onto the Google reviews, things like that. But sometimes it either gives me places that closed down 3 years ago, or it gives me places that don't even exist, which is why I'm not hugely concerned about AI taking our jobs quite yet, because it doesn't do very good stuff.
No, I think, yeah, it kind of it hit the scene and everyone was amazed at how a computer could write coherent English. But now we've kind of got past that stage. We realize, okay, it might be coherent, but it's not particularly accurate. So
yeah, and even just I've used it during that 17K month, actually, because there was so much content. I was using it to add up everything that I was putting on this invoice to make sure that the invoice was correct, and it added up the numbers wrong. And I even said to it, like, this is incorrect, because I looked through and I was like, that doesn't sound right. So I used just my calculator, the good old fashioned way, and I was like, that's wrong, and it apologized. But I was like, this doesn't fill me with confidence.
No, exactly. I mean, I think it can be useful in the research stage for maybe saving a bit of time, but you do have to check it anyway. So yeah, I think the door's still open there.
Yeah, I do think it can be good in the pre-pitching stage. Like and you can delete this bit if I'm not allowed to promote it, but I have this thing called Cold Pitch Sprint where people can use my cold pitching templates, and I have like a custom built GPT that's filled with all of my pitching questions, and then I will use my lead gen virtual assistant will like find 75 brands for them to reach out to. And with that custom GPT, that's filled with questions where people can say, like, this is my background and my experience, what brands should I reach out to? Or, I cover all of these 6 different niches, which one's going to be most lucrative? So I think it can be useful in like the pre-pitching stage, more for, I guess, the strategic stuff, but not so much for the actual writing content part.
Sure. No, I won't delete this. I think I did click onto that. That was on your freedomroute.com website, yes. Is it? And so is that something, did you get somebody to build that for you then? I
built it myself.
You built it yourself? Wow.
Ironically, I asked ChatGPT to tell me how to build it, and then I had it open on my phone, and then I had the other one open on my laptop, and I just followed the instructions for one and built it on the other. It really didn't take too long, to be fair. And because I've got all of my pitching content, and because I've been doing the coaching for quite a while, I've essentially got everything written down. So I just like put everything into there and then built it that way.
Brilliant. Excellent. I'd also noticed that you post quite a lot on LinkedIn, almost on a daily basis, I think. Is that that's a fairly regimented thing that you go through? And does that help win clients? Why do you do that, basically?
It used to. I started doing that maybe about 3 years ago now, and it was incredibly lucrative to begin with. I did used to use it as well for finding freelance writing clients, and a lot of my coaching clients do still see some success on that, not half as much as they see through email, to be honest. And in my opinion, over the last year, I would say the LinkedIn algorithm has snowballed in completely the wrong direction. So nowadays, I have got back into a habit of posting on there daily, but not necessarily the best use of my time, because I'm not entirely sure how effective it is nowadays. But part of what I do as well, like I try and run my coaching business from like a very values aligned perspective. And I know that a lot of people can't afford coaching and things like that. So I like to think that even if the stuff on LinkedIn isn't getting me any clients, I think hopefully it can help some people. So I think there's a benefit to it in that sense, if nothing else.
Mm-hmm. And are you looking to move more towards your coaching than the kind of the freelance copywriting stuff? What's your next year or two looking like?
So next year I do want to focus more on the coaching stuff. It's funny because I worked as a writer for years before I got into coaching, and the coaching was meant to be just a bit of a side hustle that I never even intended to become a coach. It just kind of happened accidentally and then became its own business. And I'm trying to be more strategic with my time, because what's happened over the last few years is I had writing years, and then I had a year of throwing myself into coaching, and the writing kind of took a backseat. And then last year was a brilliant coaching year, and then this year has been a brilliant writing year. But it's meant that the coaching hasn't quite come to a halt, but it is much more low line impact on my income than it ever has. Well, no, not ever, than how it used to be last year, let's say. So this quarter, I'm trying to build more of the coaching stuff back up. And next year, I'm trying to decide, to be perfectly honest with you, because the coaching income's a lot more scalable, but writing is my background. It's the only thing I've ever done professionally. So I think we'll have to wait and see.
Okay, well, watch this space. Now, I mean, you're in the nice position now of, like you said, being able to select clients to some degree. And you mentioned kind of a fussy or a not very nice client. And I've seen you mention it elsewhere. I'm just intrigued by, I think for a lot of people, the idea of being able to fire a client or having an awful client is kind of something they'd be willing to put up with if just for the retainer income, basically. So what kind of things, what makes a client awful that you've experienced, and what should people be aware of, in terms of taking on clients, or when they start working with clients, signs that maybe this won't be the best fit for them?
So I will say there is a huge degree of privilege in being able to fire a client. And I know, especially in like today's economy, et cetera, I am very, very fortunate to be able to do that. So I don't take being able to do that kind of thing lightly. But I think I've worked with a few awful clients in my time, and this one, they weren't necessarily awful. They were just quite rude, and sometimes they would pay a bit late. And my point of contact at the company switched, I think 3 or 4 times. And each time it switched, no one ever told me there was a new person coming in. And I only found out when like my invoices would go unpaid, and I would have to reach out to the finance department directly and stuff like that. So it was more that it was just a lot of extra hassle and a lot of extra admin than it really needed to be. They were also my smallest retainer as well. So I don't know for me how much that came into it, but I guess to an extent it was a factor in my decision of being like, I can switch them out, replace them, et cetera. But I think one thing that has been very important to me over the last few years is like being very firm on what my boundaries are. And it's something I tell a lot of my coaching clients, which sounds a bit stupid, but I think it's very good to write your boundaries down, because I think if you have boundaries in terms of the times of day that you're going to check your emails, or the times of day that you're happy to hop on Zoom calls, or the amount that you're willing to be paid for a specific, I don't know, piece length or whatever, if you write these things down, you're not going to have that same kind of internal back and forth as to whether or not you say no. You can just look at this piece of paper and be like, no, I know that my minimum rate is XYZ. Therefore, if someone offers me 20% less than that, I know that I should say no to it. And it's one of these things where it can feel quite intimidating to begin with, but I actually think it's very empowering. And I've had a few awful clients over the years that have really dented my confidence. And as I've got more strict with what I will say yes and no to, and how I respond to people who do try and take advantage, I think it has given me a lot of confidence in how I do present myself as a business owner. And I like to think that that's reflected in like my marketing and the rates that I can charge now and things like that. Brilliant.
Georgie, 45 minutes, that's us, I think. Thank you very much. That's been really insightful, really good detail there. Like I mentioned, I'm going to put the links to your website and stuff in the description, so I'm sure our guys in the group will get loads of good insights into your, like I say, what is what I haven't certainly been very aware of. I haven't even kind of tried to dip into it myself in over 25 years of travel writing. So thanks so much for your time, and long may it continue. I'll be looking, I'm sure I'll be bumping into your LinkedIn post all the time now, because I'm sure the algorithm is going to go, oh, right, they've connected. So boom, here you go. You obviously want to hear what Georgie's saying. So,
Potentially, yes. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me. I really enjoyed this.
Great. Thanks, Georgie. Take care.
Hey.
Bye.